Swiss day one is finished, and there was just a few surprises compared to what we were thinking of. So let's cover that first. BLG ends up beating Mad, but it was a lot closer in the early game than we thought. A lot of it really just stems from the fact that BLG were making some interesting mistakes. Like, there was just a lot of unforced errors, both from Mad and BLG. Like, BLG was doing some very poor contests on grubs, which didn't really make any sense. Especially the one where they're taking Dragon. They're clearly late, and then they still contest it and flop it. Even the one where Marin gets I think he goes up to a triple kill, right? And he gets 2 flashes even as Cassante. And that really just, they didn't even have to chase into him, because Bin could have just walked around, gone Mega, and then had a flank, and they would have been fine. So there was a lot of uncharacteristic mistakes by BLG, and this, again, props to Mad in the end for making this closer than it should be, but we did say BLG would win. It was a safe bet. I did think that T1 would be favored, and honestly, they kind of just screwed themselves in the end. I'm not particularly happy about the idea of playing Nico into Aurora as the answer. I think you could just play a better scaling mid, and you would perform better than that. However, if you saw how that went, the lane swaps were a real issue. I told you, the lane swaps for LPL was not going to be that great. In fact, the only team that I felt like it was pretty legit at it was LNG. I can go into it when we get to that game, but yeah, they were not good in that swap. The way 369 played it, where not only did he not know where to ward, and it seems like a lot of top laners don't understand where to ward level 1 to spot enemy bases. The fact he just walked into the jungle without any care and killed himself. And then they didn't crash on 2, they crashed on 3, which was bad in bot, because now 369 cannot react properly. There's just a lot of stuff that just clearly is untested. And so T1 was just off to the races, and just, yeah, they had a really solid start versus Test. But in the end of the day, they made just a few big time errors. The last drag they pulled, they could have had good flanking positions, and they even were accepting the situation that we're gonna play for flank, and then they just didn't. And then they just randomly committed afterwards, and they died. And there was another blue contest where Owner is using his W as Wukong to get in range, but if you do that as Wukong, it's already lost. It's really bad if you do that. So, and the reason why it's bad is because you literally go invisible, so you're not getting hit typically, and then you get a second knock up with the double knock. It's really, really good to do that with your W. But if you're using it to extend, it usually turns out pretty bad. And Ashe wasn't in range yet. There was just some errors, but T1 looks okay. They look okay. So this one I got wrong. Tess ends up winning, but I at least feel semi-confident for T1 based on that. Okay, you guys can clean this up still, but this was not the worst. Gen.G, this again was way closer than I thought. Gen.G did beat Weibo, but they were drafting some pretty old school picks. They did Smolder, which did get significant nerfs, and I think the Lucian answer is not it. Xiaohu actually had a good Lucian. I'll admit that. He actually had a good Lucian in the mid late, how he played it, but I just don't think that's the right counter choice. Especially for again, the nerfs that Smolder took. He just was clearly not gonna get as much out of it as he could. And what else did they take? Gen.G took one other, they took Rumble. And so there's this is a pick we talked about how it clearly got nerfs. It shouldn't be a huge priority at this point, but it still kind of is for some teams. And you can play, for instance, you can play tanks because he took HP percentage nerfs on his overheat and just base damage, which lets certain tanks actually perform versus Rumble. And you can play certain other counters to it. We see a lot of Jax into the Rumble, or Rumble into Jax, I guess. And so we're trying to find the right spot, and they played a pretty old school comp. There was a game where we saw Ezreal by DK, which again, it got nerfed, and I don't think you take it at the 3. it just didn't look that crazy, but he made it work, right? And yeah, so these guys just clearly could not punish it correctly with the draft. And Genji was just like, this almost was this could have been just a super big stomp by Genji in the end of the day. Regardless of this, like of them taking a very early oriented comp with Smolder as scaling and just playing on ultis, Genji just kind of screwed themselves on what happened in that game because they were always ahead on like each individual like lane matchup, and then they were having swaps to get tempo over and over again, and there was nothing Weibo could do. Like Weibo was making literally zero progress until that one error by the Grubs, and then they got a little bit back, and then it started becoming a little bit more back and forth. And even like Breathe was like using his TP horribly on like plays that didn't matter. So then they lost that edge of Jack's split push having TP. So like it looked like a Weibo game in the end of the day. It looked like a Weibo game. I was surprised that Genji would let something slip. So that was a little surprising. Fnatic DK, again, like DK were like kind of beating Fnatic's ass in the early game, and then they started making, well, really it just was the Soul point that was like the biggest issue, right? In the end of the day, like when they were playing on Soul, they didn't pull the dragon correctly, and then they also just let Fnatic walk in because they had bad like positioning and where the dragon was pulled. So this was correct, but it turned into kind of like a shitfest. Also, I think giving LeBlanc over was really weird for the 4-5 bans. Like they banned Syndra, but it's not necessarily the greatest Syndra game, even though she's good into Zyra. But yeah, I didn't really get that. This game, TL did lane swap, and I did say if the TL lane swaps, they're gonna win. They didn't win. They definitely could have won. It was surprising how close. APA did better than I anticipated into Scout, but I do think that Trist is a bait pick. That's just my personal opinion. I feel like this pick is a bait, mostly because, again, you can play Corki and Azir, who are both nerfed, into Trist and be fine. And so that naturally means you can play all the other meta champions who are actually good into Trist. So I don't really think this is necessarily the greatest pick of all time on this patch. I think it's like the fake 80 OP pick. Like Yone is quite clearly like the guy, and we saw that with him being like banned like all the time and picked for today. So this aligns, and all in all, you know, they had a real shot at winning. They misexecuted a couple times. There's a chance where like they had a really deep bot push, but then they die in the top jungle versus just playing for the mid tier 1, which is what they should always do. So they flubbed it. They could have won. LNG, pretty good, but not going to cut it if this is how it's going to turn out. And again, the whole lane swap thing is this. I put an arrow down because there was something that LNG did that like Hung checked the Raptors right away. And there's something that TL will do where they will do the Raptors at the start of lane swaps. And the whole point is that if you plan on doing the swap, taking away the Raptors, and like you just sit in the bush by the Raptors, right? And then if no one shows up, you take it and then you go into the rest of your camps. And then you'll also have advantage on taking his camp. So essentially you just gain a 1 camp lead, right? Pretty awesome. And a lot of teams don't actually invade to check that right away. So you can get away with it several times. Umpty didn't get away with it. Like, On was like in his face, made him waste a bunch of time, and got him really low. So that was amazing. And instantly I was like, okay, so maybe LG's is built a little different. HLE, you know, yes. Like these were all like super obvious ones. So at the end of the day, the only one I didn't get right was Test versus T1, but this is the one that I thought was like the most unsure of in the end of the day. Like if I were to put a percentage down, like I was like 60-40 for T1. Like it was just like I wasn't like solid on it. Now, based on what we saw from like the drafts and everything, clearly things like Jax, you know, Jhin is becoming a huge pick in this tournament, like really big pick. I don't know if this is gonna like now like his priority is gonna shoot up even like more after the first day. We might see that. Jax is still doing fine. Renekton has been fine. We saw a little bit less Cassante than usual. Oriana, Yone. 80 has been like, outside of Jhin, 80 has been kind of like a little everywhere. Like, there's nothing that's been like solid, you know? Like, you could throw an Ashe here too, I guess. And it supports a little bit teetering. Still a lot of rel, right? And Alistar bans. And then jungle, so far a lot of these teams are still just sticking to the Ivern, Maokai, Seju. They haven't really branched too far off this yet. We'll see when that happens. But for now, they haven't branched too far off that. So going into tomorrow, Swiss Stage Day 2, G2 versus HLE, you know, this will be interesting in that I feel like Broken Blade could definitely find an edge for the picks that he plays, like a lot of the picks he plays, and that would be big. The only thing is, I feel like Yike would not enjoy playing against Peanut nearly as much, and Caps will always be fine for the most part to me. I feel like he should always be fine. You know, like he always turns it up at Worlds. He's always one of the best performing Western players at Worlds. So it's probably not something I would worry about, but their bot lane, I don't know. I think whenever I think about G2 versus teams with like skilled players, a lot of it just comes down to their macro and their ability to just use like their resources and problem solving, you know? Like their problem solving skills. Like that's what I always think of when I think of G2. And with HLE, it's a little, I don't feel like they're the greatest problem solving team, to be honest. I feel like they have just some good heavy hitters, and yeah, they play around the idea of like what Delight, what Peanut, and what Dorn can think of. And yeah, like their heavy hitters are definitely mid bot, like mid 80 for sure. And 80 is definitely something that G2 will have to worry about. But if you have the right picks, the right ideas, you're a good lane swap team, maybe you push more into that. This is a hard decision to say exactly how this is going to go, because G2 has come close to beating Team 1. They usually have a bit more success against LCK teams compared to LPL teams. So this one's actually tough. Because part of me, like, obviously the easiest thing is to say HLE will win. You know? Like, HLE will win because of the guys they have. But, you know, this... Oh, man. Because it's a best of one. There's actually an edge that G2 could win. I think I'm going to go with... I'm going to hate myself if this is wrong. But I kind of want to go with G2 for this game. I kind of want to go with G. I feel like because it's a best of one, I feel like this is not a determination and that G2 is just definitively better than HLE. But I think because it's a best of one, there's a lot of random stuff that can happen. Like, I think in a best of series, like HLE probably would win because they can actually adjust over time. But in this, I feel like it's not nearly so easy. DK versus Fly. I would say... I feel like DK still does not have like 100% idea on how they want to play the meta. I think Showmaker had a really good game. I think Lucid had a pretty good game overall. Aiming was good. I think their support was pretty whatever, and I thought Kingen was pretty whatever. But I think like Whipple's not really going to be much of an issue for Kingen at the end of the day. And I think Quad is pretty much playing the same stuff that Showmaker is playing. Except Showmaker will have like better counter picks from the meta compared to Quad. So honestly, I should vote for the Flyboys, but I'm probably in a position where I feel like it's more like this still. I'm not like 100% confident that it's just a DK win, because again, I feel like this could be closer than it seems. But I do feel that the consistency that I saw in some of their play for DK, like in terms of like individual players, was good. I feel like some of the ways they tackle fights was bad, and that's why it's like iffy. But I do feel like it's a DK win. Gen G versus Tess. So I think the biggest issue is just the meta. Like, what are their reads on the meta? Because I think Tess's read was a little... It was okay. You know? Like, Tessa's read was okay. Gen G's read was not great. So I hope they actually can adjust. Because in the end of the day, you know, with Tess being T1, I don't necessarily think that was, like, exactly on, like, T1 just being a terrible team. So the fact that it was that close while T1 was kind of, like, sluggish in a way, I think that gives an edge to Gen G. And assuming Gen G can, like, upkeep their good play and not just make those mistakes they do, sure. LNG versus BLG. BLG did not look that good. LNG looked... Well, LNG had its own issues. I feel like Ben is just such a bad... Like, especially, like, man, Ben is definitely just a way better player than Ziga, and... Yeah, that's just like the biggest issue I have. Like, I might actually just give it to all the teams on the left versus the right when looking at this. Like, there's a reason why BLG and Gen G are like favorites, right? And I think for this, unfortunately for LNG, if they lane swap, it might actually be in their favor because I feel like BLG did not play that nearly as good compared to LNG, but yeah, right now the meta, like, I think the top laners can really break out more than what they're showing, and that's an advantage that BLG should definitely use. I think Elk had a kind of a down performance in what he had, and if he does better, that will help a ton. So I feel like this, and Knight was good. Knight was very good, and they played mid jungle pretty well that game. Now that I remember, like Fresco, he could not play. And their mid jungle play and everything was like kind of a downward. So BLG. T1 versus PNG. We don't really need to talk too much about it. I mean, like, yeah, this is pretty obvious. They should win. Mad versus PSG. Mad versus PSG. So the issue that Mad had in their game was that they kind of just... They were gifted some free leads. I think their reads on the meta is like fine. It's like okay. It's like okay, right? And I think PSG has like a fine read on the meta too. So I don't think there's gonna be like a huge issue for either team coming in for draft sake. But for Mad, I mean, Frescoe was really bad, and Maple is not going to be someone who's going to like be oppressive to Frescoe in that way. But I feel like the way Maple will play will be a benefit to his entire team. And unless Frescoe like figures this shit out, it's really good for them, right? And bot lane wise, you know, again, this is where Mad's gonna have to really push into because they did that. They've had a Trist. They played it bot lane with an Alistar. They're in their face. I really like that style. I hope Mad keeps going that style. I think that'd be really nice for them to do that because that's what those guys did in the RLs all the time. So keep going with that. And Aloya had a fine situation, but I feel like if these guys get behind, they are a little sluggish. They are a little sluggish if they get behind. And for now, you know, Ozzy's kind of a funny guy on how he plays. I think this is like pretty close, but again, I'm leaving the PSG. Mostly just because I feel like I'm just gonna make my read on how Frescoe has been playing, and if Maple can do what he likes to do, Jangia can have a actual good character who has impact. I think they're gonna be okay. I really do think they're gonna be fine. But it does depend on that. And this is not as confident either. Like for now, these are ones are a lot I'm not nearly as confident on. Weibo versus TL, you know, Weibo did have a better game than I anticipated. I do think Light will be an issue. Like Light is very, very good. And Xiaohu had a better game than I anticipated as well. He definitely did. I don't know. I really want to side with TL because, you know, I want to see LCS do well. I want to see NA do well. But I'm just kind of struggling with the idea of it's just the way they played was just like the fight executions were just so off. And you can't make those mistakes. And even though I can feel like TL would make the right choices in the end in like the lane swaps and maybe getting early leads and whatever, it's always the same thing where like Umpty's going too far, you know? Or like someone's like overstepping, and the way LPL teams use their TPs, like the LPL TP, is they're just kind of like instant in a way. You know, like they don't necessarily save their TPs to, you know, like long-term playmaking. Like it's a lot of like, oh, we see something happening, we're gonna do it. And they're in. And they're going. And this is gonna be like a bloodbath. For sure, it's gonna be a bloodbath for TL and another LPL team, especially one who's gonna have a little bit more less refined play. And when it comes to that kind of fighting and we can't perform, yeah, I mean, like these guys will win. Like they will win. Like I want to say, like if you lane swap, like TL will win. But after today and how Weibo played today, I think these guys just need to adjust their draft a little bit, and I think they're okay. Fnatic versus Gam, dude. I'm actually gonna put everyone on the left side. That's funny. It should be Fnatic. I think Fnatic showed a better game than I anticipated, at least like as it progressed. You know, they still need to get things going sooner. Noah did look better, even though he had some int moments. Noah did look better. And I think that's just not, I think just Gam's not going to be able to like overcome that. And I think Oscar actually had a fine game. Yeah, obviously he could have more impact. But I think there was moments where I saw that Oscar clearly read what he needed to do for just creating space, even though he was like 0-3. And that was a good sign. And yeah, like I said, this is not, like, this is like kind of, maybe some of these are kind of boring, you know, in the end, like siding Gen G over Tess. Again, kind of just depends on how Gen G reads the meta based on like the first day, because I think they will get punished harder by Tess if they try the same stuff that they did today. And if they don't get punished, then I guess they're just that good. I don't know what to tell you. For Fly versus DK, it's like, again, it just comes down to individual performance. Is Kingen gonna just be like low impact like he did today? Hopefully not. It could happen, and then Blippo can have that like lead, but like the way Blippo plays and just how on top like Fly needs to be compared to like what they played against today, you know, I'm gonna just give it to the side of DK for now. And I think the most interesting matchups to pay attention to for tomorrow, for sure, obviously G2 versus like HLE, like you want to know this. Like you want to know what happens in this for sure. This is another one, you know, like you could almost say every single matchup in the top half is going to be like a banger, but I feel like specifically we're not 100% sure how these are going to go. I feel like this one is a lot more sided on Gen G, same with BLG. So these might not be as interesting compared to the first two here. And then PSG versus Mad, and then this here, like these four are going to be really big. Because if Mad loses here, you know, I think they can climb out of like situations, but it's they're going to be in the doghouse. And for TL, I feel like for TL at least, they would be actually okay if they go 0-2, because they're going to be probably playing against GAM or PNG. And at that point, like, I feel like they have the players who will rise to the occasion and get out of that at least and advance to the 1-2 bracket. But for Mad, I feel like that would be a lot scarier. For PSG, they'd probably be fine, I think. And the teams that, like, move up to 2-0, yeah, I mean, like, you want to just get in there right away. Because then you have several opportunities to still advance. And that's just like, that makes things like way, 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 way easier. Way easier. So that's my thoughts, guys. You know, we'll see how it goes. So I got one of the matchups wrong for the first day. We'll see how the second day goes and keep progressing from that. Probably by the time we get to this set here, day 3, this will be the most, like, it will just get progressively harder to predict in some ways, just because one, if it's best of 3, that will be way different than the best one, because like I said, there's a surprise element. But also just, you don't know how teams are gonna like change up their strategies, and until we see it in action, you know, we're still going a little blind. So thanks for watching, and let's enjoy the games tomorrow, and we'll do another video.